Welcome to Daddy and Pals, David Paisley.
Hello.
Hello. So
Hi.
just a little introduction. This is David. He is an actor and an LGBTQ ally and activist on social media and various other places. And it is absolutely lovely to speak to you today.
Hi, Jamie. How's it going?
So for the benefit of people that might not know about you already, could you provide us with a little introduction to yourself and what you do and what you're getting up to?
Yeah, sure. I've been an actor for an awfully long time. I started when I was about 19 and I did a few different TV jobs. I was on Holby City for a while and Casualty when I was much younger, much more fresh-faced.
That's lovely.
And for the last few years, I've been working on a TV show in Scotland called River City, which is Scotland's main soap opera. I play a gangster. I play a big tough guy, which is a lot of fun because I'm really not that tough. But yeah, career. Oh, and I'm a bit of a, what's the word? A Twitter loudmouth. That's how I tend to describe it. But I'm like an LGBT activist. I have been since I first came out. Because with my first acting job, my character was a gay character. And so I didn't really get the opportunity to be in the closet. I was always out of the closet. That was in 1999. I am that old.
So let's just have a quick chat about, I know you mentioned that you started, was it Holby City in 1999?
No, I did a thing called Tinseltown, which was set in the Glasgow club scene. I did a few series of that, and then I moved into Holby in about 2002. I was a midwife. A midwife.
Yeah, we remember you.
Yeah, I loved it. You know, I loved working with, because I got to meet lots of little young babies. It's quite scary because they're only about 2 weeks old when they come on set. And so they come on set and the mums are there and everyone's really quiet and hushed. And then they're like, action.
Prior to Holby City then, how did you get started? Did you go to acting school or anything?
No, I didn't. You know, I was at university. I was studying physics. I was going to be a physicist.
Yeah.
It didn't work. But I did some theatre work with some theatre companies in Glasgow, and I kind of got spotted doing that, and they suggested me for this role. It was the character was like a young gay man who was working in a nightclub, and at that point I was a young gay man and I was working in a nightclub, so it was kind of slightly typecast.
And this is now talking about your kind of journey to where you are now with, is it River City? Sorry, your the programme you're currently starring in. So your image has obviously changed quite dramatically since your early 20s, like mine has as well. And do you find that your like audience has kind of grown with you, or do you now like appeal to a totally new audience?
No, it's the same audience, I think. I think I was what would be termed a twink. Which for anyone that doesn't know, that just means that a young, sprightly gay man who's quite youthful. And now I think I'm a bit more, I don't know, something else. A bear. I think I'm probably more like a bear. We have these terms in the gay community that are a little bit restrictive. But that's the thing. All the people that were watching the shows that I did 20 years ago are now 20 years older themselves. And so I've kind of grown with them. I've got a really lovely, I get lots of lovely feedback from people who've watched me over the years, and it's actually really nice to have that connection with people over time. The character on River City, actually, I first was in it 10 years ago, and I played him as like a young, skinny student who was a bit like nice. And then I came back in 10 years later because I put on a little bit of a little bit of beef, and they were like, right, we want you to be a scary psychopath.
Yeah, you know, I don't think I'd be able to play a bad guy.
It's fun. It's so much fun. I think because it's so different to how I am in life that you can just let go and go, I'm going to be really mean. I'm going to be really, really mean.
That's super addictive.
Yeah, and because it's not real. So, you know, it's just a fun way of playing around with what it might be like to be like mean.
Good outlet actually for anger.
I think that's right. I mean, acting is one of those things that you get to explore emotions that you wouldn't necessarily explore in real life.
Let's talk about, which is where I basically found you recently, and you sort of came back to us again on social media because you're quite a sort of prevalent LGBTQ campaigner on Twitter, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Standing up for kind of the injustice that particularly trans people experience in 2021, which really baffles me, you know, because in these days where we're sort of all supposed to be hashtag be kind, and, you know, LGBTQ rights have seemingly moved on quite considerably, trans people seem to still be left behind and scapegoats.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar. I think it's very similar to what we experienced as gay men back in the 90s and 80s, when we were scapegoated and made out to be a danger to children and young people. I remember when I was first coming out, you couldn't get married, you couldn't adopt. The idea of having a gay family or an LGBT family, that wasn't really something that people were aware of, and that's something that's really changed over time. But at that time, gay people were very much seen as a threat. We had Section 28, which meant that local authorities weren't allowed to talk about gay lifestyles as if they were positive or something good. And what we're seeing now is kind of a callback to a lot of that homophobia that was in society at the time. But now the focus has really shifted to trans people and non-binary people, and they're very much categorized as being a threat or a danger when actually they really aren't. And what I see is a recycling of a lot of the same talking points that were made about gay men and lesbians and bisexual people back in the 90s, about how dangerous and scary we were. And it's just being used again, but on trans people. And that's why I think it's really, really important for us as a community to stand up for and speak in support of trans people, but also never to speak over trans people, to help amplify their voices and help them tell their stories and make sure that they're heard. Being an ally is, you've got to try and balance that. And, this is a call between two gay men. So we're going to chat about what our feelings are as gay men. And I think it's always good to get a trans person to speak as well, and find out what their experiences are.
Absolutely. And, I also think I entirely agree with you that we are seeing the same rhetoric from the 1990s, which was like still a huge hangover period from the AIDS pandemic. And, I think I'm about the same age as you, but I was born in 1980. So basically went to secondary school throughout Section 28. Yeah. And so, things have improved for us as LGB plus people, in that now we can have families and we can expect a life free of discrimination mostly. But not so for trans people. And I think the one difference though between the kind of people that were particularly homophobic back then and the kind of people that trans people are facing transphobia from now, particularly on Twitter, is that they are well-educated people with quite a convincing message.
We often get confronted by what sounds like very legitimate concerns, and they call that legitimate concerns. And I remember the legitimate concerns that people had in the 90s about LGBT families and LGBT relationships, and the way that we were spoken about then. And when the debate about trying to get rid of Section 28 brought a lot of that up. And I think what you realise is these kind of anti-LGBT sentiments, they're always there. It's just it became really unfashionable to be homophobic. As we gained a bit more equality, you went really loud. But now we're reaching a point where I feel that so much anti-trans rhetoric has been promoted in society that people feel enabled to speak against LGBT people. And you're seeing that not just focused on trans people now. Just recently, there was some people speaking out against co-parenting relationships because I think Owen Jones, the journalist, spoke about wanting to co-parent. Yeah. And there was a huge outcry from people saying, oh, it's disgusting, you're just using someone. And I'm like, you don't know what this is. You don't understand that that's actually a way that LGBT people have made families for decades and decades. A lot of people speak out about trans people and they've never met a trans person knowingly.
It only takes me to put something quite mildly supportive of trans people on Twitter, and I usually then receive a barrage of people who think I'm misogynistic. And yes. I think this is because one line of transphobic attack is that trans support conflicts with the rights of female people.
That's something that's happened in the last couple of years, and I think people have exploited this particular idea of conflict between two groups. For me, I feel like the LGBT community and women's rights have always been complementary. We're both kind of we face the same opposition. Essentially, gender is what is the root of a lot of the discrimination and oppression that women and LGBT people face. Women because of their gender, and LGBT people, like gay people, because of the gender of who they love. Trans and non-binary people because of the expression of their gender. So it's really gender roles within society that is the root of where we are all all experience inequality and oppression. So we're kind of all on the same side. So this very destructive argument that there's actually conflict between us is kind of, I think, designed to tear us apart. And I think it's best to resist that as much as possible. That's why I also campaign quite passionately for women's rights. And I do a lot of work in Scotland with Women's Aid, raising money for domestic violence shelters and raising awareness, because I think it's really important to say that you can do both. You can support trans people and you can support women's rights. And it's really important that you do. It doesn't follow that if you support trans people that you're misogynist. And it's a really shocking accusation, because I'm like, what? It doesn't stack up in my mind. From my experience of meeting and speaking to trans people, all trans people I know are very feminist in their outlook. And almost every feminist I know is very trans supportive.
It is a very tiny fringe, tiny group, I think, of people that describe themselves as feminists, when actually what they are transphobes that have kind of organised a bit of a collective. And I think they're very alert to anybody in the public eye like us supporting trans people, and they will pile on. And I think that what they're trying to do to validate their message, which is already invalid, is just blast you with absolutely tons of sort of misogyny feedback.
So what you see, this happens quite regularly to organisations online. So I saw recently that I think it was a cycling organisation posted something that was trans supportive, and they got hundreds of replies and retweets from these very negative online trolls. And that happens to lots of organisations. As soon as they post something that's supportive, or I think it was the UN Women's Rights kind of account, they posted something about supporting trans people, and it was, and to see these pylons just happening regularly, and it doesn't even have to be a particularly controversial statement, just a statement saying, like, you know, trans people have a right to exist, and trans people are who they say they are, and that suddenly becomes this flashpoint for negative comments. And I think it's become quite destructive and quite corrosive for trans people, and I can't imagine what it's like to be a trans person in modern Britain and to have that level of scrutiny almost every day on your right to exist. Especially the way that I think there's a lot of focus on like trans young people and children that are gender diverse, and that's quite painful, because I remember growing up as an LGBT person, like, we have an understanding of how that feels, and you often feel quite isolated and quite separate from society, because you feel a little bit like an outlier. And so I think the environment right now for trans young people must be quite scary and quite difficult. And anyone that has a trans child or a trans young person in their life, it's really important to show them support and to make sure that they feel loved and valued.
So basically, Daddy and Dad, our social media kind of home is Instagram, right? And but we also have Twitter, where we follow you and we talk about trans rights and retweet sort of rubbish dad jokes and stuff. But for me, Instagram is a much more comfortable social media home for us, and that's because we're able to moderate our own page and what comments and interactions appear beneath our content. So for example, if we put a picture up of the four of us on a cycle ride and we get a few people saying, "Ooh, gay dads," or, you know, whatever, we get sort of Bible verses sometimes, we can actually click on those and delete them and get rid of them and block the people, the trolls. On Twitter, mind you, if we put something up there about our family and people decide to put trolling comments about us being gay dads or whatever, we can't really do anything about it other than block the person that's put the comment on and report them, which has a varying level of success. It feels to me like platforms which allow more moderation are a little bit safer for LGBT people.
Yeah, but then I think there's a very different thing that is achieved by both platforms. So Twitter is a very much an open platform, which allows you to connect with lots of people that you maybe don't have a connection with, whereas Instagram's more of a closed platform where you're really providing content for the people that follow you and them, kind of them only. And so there are positives and negatives to both. Like, an open platform means you can sometimes get a message out to a lot more people than would usually get it. But then also it opens you up to a lot of that kind of negative troll-like behavior. Whereas Instagram, you're right, it's a kind of safer place, simply because you have so much more control over the audience that you interact with. I think it's fascinating that we're having this conversation about our safety as LGBT people online, in this day and age. I would have thought in 2021, the idea that we would have anti-LGBT people and religious people and saying anti-gay things on our platforms, that would have fallen by the wayside by now. And it's sad to see that it still happens.
So I like to end each of our Daddy and Pal interviews to chat about your experiences with children. And that's basically because it's pretty much all I ever think about, because I'm just full on hands-on dad. That's my main sort of full-time job. So I'm interested to find out, David, about your experiences with sort of as an uncle or an honorary uncle to your friends' kids and that kind of thing.
Oh, it's a funny one to talk about right now, because I think everyone's really missing, especially if you're an uncle or grandparents, because, you know, if you're not close by to your family, my family are a little bit spread out, and so I don't really get to see them as for the last year. I really miss them, and they're growing up really fast. My oldest nephew was born on the same day as me. He stole my birthday. And like, I love them all to bits. They're such wonderful people. And it's like, I really value having them in my life, but I've not been able to see them for a while. So I'm like,
oh, I really miss all your nephews.
So he's like 16 now. Oh God. So I've got 2 nephews and 2 nieces, and my other brother's got a niece. I've also got a lot of friends that have got kids, and they're in my life as well. I'm a godparent to one of my friends' children down in London. And it's one of those things of just, I cannot wait to see them. I can't wait to like hang out with my friends and see their kids again, and just just because there's a different energy you get from children, and I find it really hard to talk to children as if they're children. I'm always like, hi, how's your day? Like the little adults.
Yeah. Before we run out of time, because we're on a Zoom call that can run out any minute, I wanted you to tell everybody about your charitable pursuits, including your lovely t-shirt you're wearing and the charities that you support through your campaigning.
So yeah, I do quite a lot of campaign work for different charities. LGBTQ Scotland is an organisation that's supported, because I went to them as a youth group when I was a teenager. And really? I'm setting up a website quite soon, should be launched hopefully this week. And this is one of the things that we'll be selling on our website. It's called LGBT Literati. There's a reason for that story, which I won't go into. But it's a fundraising campaigning platform where we'll be campaigning for all the things that I think are kind of important for the community, and being quite reflective on that. And we're raising funds specifically in the first instance for the legal fund for transgender lives, which I think is a really important thing at the moment, because as part of the LGBT community, trans people face so much difficulty in society at the moment. So I think it's really important to have a positive campaign for members of the LGBT community to show support for other members of the LGBT community.
So tell everyone just briefly where they can find you on Twitter and your website. Oh,
so my Twitter handle is just David Paisley. It's at David Paisley. I managed to get my own name. Not David Paisley 3457951.
David, it's been absolutely wonderful having you on Daddy and Pals. Thank you so much for your time. And
thank you.